appearance of earth and sky, but why do you not know how to interpret the present time?
Hear these words from the book of Hebrews. Listen for the word of the Lord. By faith, the people passed through the Red Sea as if it were dry land. But when the Egyptians attempted to do so, they were drowned. By faith, the walls of Jericho fell after they had been encircled for 7 days. By faith, Rahab the prostitute did not perish with those who were disobedient, because she had received the spies in peace. And what more should I say? For time would fail me to tell of Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, of David and Samuel and the prophets, who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, obtained promises, shut the mouths of lions, quenched raging fire, escaped the edge of the sword, won strength out of weakness, became mighty in war, put foreign armies to flight. Women received their dead by resurrection. Others were tortured, refusing to accept release in order to obtain a better resurrection. Others suffered mocking and flogging, and even chains and imprisonment. They were stoned to death. They were sawn in two. They were killed by the sword. They went about in skins of sheep and goats, destitute, persecuted, tormented, of whom the world was not worthy. They wandered in deserts and mountains, and in caves and holes in the ground. Yet all these, though they were commended for their faith, did not receive what was promised, since God had provided something better, so that they would not, apart from us, be made perfect. Therefore, since we are surrounded by so great a cloud of witnesses, let us also lay aside every weight and the sin that clings so closely, and let us run with perseverance the race that is set before us, looking to Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, who for the sake of the joy that was set before him endured the cross, disregarding its shame, and has taken the seat at the right hand of the throne of God. Let us pray. Oh God, may the words of my mouth, the meditations of all our hearts be acceptable in your sight. O God, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. Okay. This one's a no-brainer. This one's easy. We've been talking all summer about core values and what we might possibly list as a church, what our core values might be. So at various points we've talked about prayer, and we've talked about mission, and we've talked about stewardship and justice and a few others. And now, this Sunday, we get to faith. This should be easy. This should be obvious. We don't even need to bother talking about this. Let's go ahead and kick out of here early and get to lunch. Why would we even need to take time to reflect on faith of all things? That's one of those that goes without saying, that we just assume, well, of course we would list faith as a core value. That is what the church is based on. It's what we live by. Why would we take up a whole service to bother talking about this? And yet, as with the various other topics and possible core values we've reflected on the past few weeks, it might still be worth asking, when we talk about faith, what are we talking about? What do we mean when we even say the word? What does faith mean to us? Well, luckily, we have the book of Hebrews to help us out this morning. This entire chapter, all of chapter 11, deals with the topic of faith. It starts out, we heard a little bit of it last week, where the very first verse of this passage is one of those that gets put on greeting cards and on plaques and on all sorts of door signs and all sorts of things. Faith is the assurance of things hoped for, the conviction of things not seen. It sounds nice. What it means, what that verse means, all the way back at the beginning of the 11th chapter of Hebrews, is that faith, the essence of faith, is to trust in something that we can't necessarily see. To trust in a reality around us that we're not necessarily always aware of. Or to trust in the possibility of something later coming into view that we continue to hope for. So then, with this setup, most of the rest of this 11th chapter of Hebrews lists off a whole bunch of biblical figures who exhibit great faith, who in the stories that we're able to read and during their lives, we can go back and we can read again and again of these great biblical figures, these towering faith hall of famers, and learn from them, be inspired by them. So the writer of Hebrews mentions people like Abraham and Isaac and Jacob and Joseph and Moses. All of these great figures whom we can learn from and be inspired by over and over and over again. And we pick up on the tail end of this big, long list. We get to hear today about the Israelites as they passed through the Red Sea and the great faith that it took for them to pass through on dry land, to trust in God as they went about onto the other side, escaping from the Egyptians. And we hear about the great battle of Jericho, where the walls came tumbling down, and the great faith that took. And we hear about Rahab, the prostitute, who hid the Israelite spies and who eventually ends up listed in the genealogy of Jesus. And then the writer runs out of room. He says, I don't have enough time, I don't have enough parchment to mention all of these other people that I could name, people like Gideon and Samson and David and Samuel and all of the prophets. And all of those who even came after that, in that middle period between the end of the Old Testament and the beginning of Jesus' life, all of those people who were persecuted, and even those who came after. I can't even mention them all, the writer says. I need to move on. I need to tell you about other things. So there are so many who can inspire us. So many we can learn from. And therefore, now we get into the beginning of chapter 12. Therefore, since we are surrounded by a great cloud of witnesses, all of these people of faith who have come generation and generation and generation before us. All of these people we can read about in the scriptures, and all of these people even more recently, people we ourselves have known, people whose lives we ourselves can point to that we have known personally, who have shown us how to live by faith. We are surrounded by this great cloud, as if we are in this great sports stadium, and we ourselves are running a race that they are watching. And they are watching, and they are cheering, and they are encouraging as we continue. Let us run then, he says, with perseverance, this race that is set before us. And it's not just that we're running for running's sake. It is that we are following the leader, the one who is out in front, Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of our faith, he calls him. The one who shows us how to live, the one who is leading us on, the one whom we are to follow. Let us run this race, following Jesus, the one ahead of us, who shows us how. Now, if your household has been anything like mine the past week or more, you've been watching a different set of races and watching a different set of games. And we have been diligently keeping up with, not really with medal counts, so much as everything else. Watching these sometimes ridiculously late into the night to make sure that we don't miss anything. Everything from swimming to soccer to rugby to volleyball, all of it, we have been keeping up. This is the most we've paid attention in years, actually. And so, one of the things that I personally have found much more interesting than medal counts. Medal counts are the least interesting thing about this. It's the stories. We get to hear stories about the athletes. Not just before the games, we get to hear about what they had to endure, possibly to get to this point. We've been able to hear a little bit about how hard they trained and who has been supporting them. And we've been hearing about their great dream that they are finally fulfilling. But there are also those stories that happen during the games themselves. And so, as we've heard about these stories, we've heard things like Simone Biles and her story of adoption. We have heard about Yusra Mardini, the Syrian refugee who pushed a boat for 3 hours in the water to get people to safety. We've heard about Katie Ledecky and Michael Phelps focusing on the task at hand rather than getting sidetracked by taunting. I was this close to putting that famous Phelps picture on the cover, that death glare. I really wanted to use that for the bulletin cover this week. Maybe next time. We have heard all of these stories. These stories that we can be inspired by. These stories where we can become more invested in what is happening. And as we've watched this, maybe this is also true for some of your households, but I have also been watching one other thing. I have been watching an almost 3-year-old girl completely mesmerized. Can't take her eyes, particularly during the women's events. Rugby, soccer, swimming, gymnastics, gymnastics. And just how invested she is, and what kind of dreams she might be dreaming. What kind of inspiration she might be drawing from this as she watches all of the running and all of the swimming and all of the leaping and all of the flipping and everything else. How she might draw inspiration from watching these great figures live out their dreams. When we talk about faith, we might be able to talk about faith in at least two ways. First way is belief or knowledge. When we talk about faith, one way that we might talk about faith quite often is in terms of memorizing verses, getting to know where the books of the Bible are, becoming more familiar with statements of faith and creeds, learning more facts about God and Jesus and the church and the Bible and the Holy Spirit and everything else. So one way that we talk about faith is in terms of building and deepening knowledge of these things, which is important. It helps us better understand what we're talking about and what we believe in. The other way we can talk about faith is trust. Trusting in this reality and this possibility that we can't always see, just as the writer of Hebrews talks about. And we deepen our knowledge of that. We seek to better understand that. But there come those moments where we just need to trust, just need to push forward, just need to persevere in the race that is set before us. And one of the ways that helps us along often is by watching others, by paying attention to others and how they are running, how they have lived in faith at various points in their lives, and holding on to those stories so that maybe we can glean some inspiration later on when we most need it. And certainly these things play off of each other, deepening our understanding for those times when we just have no choice but to trust, where the knowledge doesn't matter as much as the living. And so together, all of this knowledge and trust and encounter and experience all fits together as we strive forward. So what do we mean? Or what would we mean if we listed faith as a core value? We would mean, among other things, certainly trying to deepen our understanding of what we believe and why. Asking the questions, reading and teaching and learning and all that comes with that. But what we would also mean is that trust, that perseverance, that faithfulness, particularly in those moments when we need it the most. And we also mean drawing inspiration from that great cloud of witnesses that are around us, paying attention to their examples that they set for us, and also recognizing that we too are a part of that cloud ourselves, that others are also watching us, learning from us, following our example, and possibly inspired by what we do. So what do we mean? Maybe it's obvious. Maybe still, when we talk about faith, it is obvious to us what we mean. And maybe we don't